Angelus Rosedale Cemetery, originally Rosedale Cemetery before it was bought by Angelus Mortuary, is a special place. You can see from the photographs how beautiful it is, and yes, you could argue, oh, well, cemeteries, those are easy to photograph. You got the greenery, you've got the repose, you've got the sense of rest, but it's a beautiful spot, large spot, right in the center of West Adams, and it's got a fascinating history. The first ethnically integrated cemetery in Los Angeles. So many luminaries, people that our culture celebrates are buried there. But I mentioned the integrated aspect because you've got the famous people like Hattie McDaniel, who starred in Gone with the Wind, is buried there. And she had, if I understand this correctly, wanted to be buried in Hollywood, but cemeteries in Hollywood were saying, "Oh no, we're not going to have any of that here. The dead might complain." So she was buried in Rosedale, and she lived at that time around the South Harvard area of West Adams. You think of Harvard Heights, and you think just go south of that again, the 10 bisects it, and then you have the South Harvard area. It's not a block that you see in this book, but if I do an additional volume or do an update, I can see myself going down there and shooting Hattie's old house and several of those amazing mansions and churches, religious buildings there on South Harvard. The Ridge Mansion is really something. So she couldn't be buried in Hollywood. Now, years later, the famous Hollywood Forever Cemetery, now the more modern age, did approach the family and say, "Hey, things are different now. If you want, just bring her up here." And they told them where they could go. So she's buried there, as are so many famous folks. And you can see some of the photographs in this chapter of people like David Burbank of famous Burbank, the city of Burbank fame. And another interesting thing for me while shooting this about the Rosedale Cemetery is the fact that it's another example of how public transportation was so prevalent in LA 100 years ago, in the sense that you could, as a mourner, hire a mourner streetcar, follow the casket, mount the casket on a specially designed streetcar, and it would actually go in. It would have a little spoke go right towards the mortuary inside Angelus Rosedale. So that gives you an example, just as an anecdotal example of how prevalent, how large the network of rail and how central rail was to Los Angeles at that time. Now, interestingly enough, here we are in 2014, the early 21st century, and people are realizing again the benefits of rail. I mentioned ciclovia and that kind of transportation, and that kind of celebration of the bicycle or the non-car, I would say, bicycle and walking. I mentioned that in the Victoria Park chapter. But we're seeing billions of dollars of investment in Los Angeles right now. A lot of people who don't know LA are surprised to find out that we have a subway here. We have a metro. We also have dedicated bus lanes, and we have a tram now that works with the metro. And so there's a lot of investment and a lot of enthusiasm right now for public transportation in LA. And I want to kind of end on this aspect about the cemetery. One of the things that really attracted to me, one of the very first things that I shot in this book was the historical reenactment, right? Historical reenactment of these folks that the West Adams Heritage Association put on in the cemetery, in which people dressed up as as the musician or a chef or an actress. And, as a kid, I'm sure I would have thought that was hokey. It's something you'd go to on a field trip, right? And you might see in one of the photographs that it seems like this, it's older folks, retired folks, people who have time on their hands who would go to something like this. But I tell you, after doing this project, I'd recommend this for anybody. There's something to be said, of course, for remembering the past, or remembering the history, even if you're not from the area, but remembering, discovering the history of that which is around you. And I think doing a reenactment of folks who are buried in a cemetery, it becomes a transformative space, in the sense it becomes a place of genuine remembrance for a community. And one can imagine cemeteries as centers for remembrance, not just for personal remembrance of family members or loved ones that are gone, but as a repository for community memory. And I think something like that may sound grandiose, but I think something like the Living History Tours provide a function that kind of function at some sort. And it's something I'd highly recommend. So I would offer a call to action to anybody watching this. Visit your local cemetery or mortuary. Find out something about the people that lived and died wherever you are, even if your roots in that area are not that deep, because by discovering these things, this allows you to put where you are in context. It allows you to create a narrative for your way of being. And narrative, obviously we can think of religion, that narrative is central to our own human beings' healthy functioning, right? Again, hence the power of religion and the power of myth and storytelling. And I would suggest this to anybody, that if they can't go on a living history tour, then create your own, or discover something about the history of the people that have passed that are in your area. And I think it'll make for a healthier and happier existence for you. And I hope that sounds a bit grandiose, but that's been the personal impact, very strong personal impact of me photographing the Angelus Rosedale Cemetery. That's the impact that it's had on me.